the biggest difference between like LA and the Bay Area? You know, the Southern Cal and
the biggest difference?
Yeah.
We don't gang bang in the Bay.
At all.
That's really mostly it. Like, that's really it. Like, you know, they can't claim Crips and Bloods and shit like that, but they got like different neighborhoods also. But we just claim neighborhoods, we claim our streets and shit.
Now we're gonna have somebody to come in and start telling us, oh, wear blue rag now, wear red rag, and you a Crip, you a Blood now. What about my bloodline?
Because our neighborhood structure was already gamed up.
Exactly.
Already with the business.
Yeah.
And we wasn't about to just go sign up to.
Just wanted the world to know that no Crips and Bloods here, but we still get down to it.
You turn to a corner, and boom, there's some kind of gang presence waiting. The Bloods and Crips. They made it feel like they had the whole country in a chokehold, like everywhere you looked, it's either red or blue. But there was one place in California that didn't play by that rule book, the Bay Area.
It's really interesting that you had this, it's a global phenomenon now, Crips and Bloods. And
all
over California, but just
all over the world.
Yeah.
All over the world. Except the Bay Area.
Right.
You've probably heard people say the Bay Area is one of the roughest spots in California. Well, the history actually backs it up. But all that street action, none of it has anything to do with the Bloods or the Crips.
You want that protection, bro, everything.
We the only place where there's no Crips, no Bloods, no GDs, no Vice Lords, none of that. We ain't under nothing. When you go to jail here, you under your hood shit, you feel me? Just wanted the world to know that no Crips and Bloods here, but we still get down to it, bro. Cause I be seeing hella people talk about the Bay Area and shit like.
Not that they didn't try. These two have been making moves since way back, trying to plant flags in the Bay Area. But the folks up there weren't having it. They pushed back hard, saying straight up that they didn't need the colors. Some even got beat down just to prove how serious that stance was. If you ask most people about gangs in California, they'll probably mention the Bloods and Crips. These two groups are famous, or maybe infamous, for their rivalry and their roots in Los Angeles. But if you head up north to the Bay Area, places like Oakland, San Francisco, and Richmond, you won't find the Bloods and Crips running the streets like they do in LA.
There was certain guys that just wasn't going to accept it in Oakland. It just well as guys in San Francisco. It was certain guys like myself, you know, and some of the Branners, we just wasn't going to accept it.
The reason for this is actually pretty simple. The Bay Area already had its own gangs, its own history, and its own way of doing things long before the Bloods and Crips tried to move in.
And now we're going to have somebody to come in and start telling us, oh, wear blue rag now, wear red rag, and you a Crip, you a Blood now. What about my bloodline?
Because our neighborhood structure was already gamed up.
Exactly.
Already with the business.
Yeah.
And we wasn't about to just go sign up to put a rag. But
for instance, the hyphy movement. Back in the 90s, Mac Dre kicked off the whole hyphy movement. And it wasn't just about music. It was about shifting the vibe.
Hyphy was created by like Keek the Sneak, they say Keek and Dre and them and all them. Like the energy is actually, that's what hyphy is, like a wild, somebody wild, just like full of energy.
He wanted gang life to be more than just the usual cycle of violence, crack, and jail that you'd see with crews like the Bloods and Crips in LA. Instead, Bay Area sets started doing things their own way. They mixed people from different backgrounds, built their own identity, and came up with fresh styles to reap. No need to copy the red or blue politics from down south.
Like the cousin to Crunk, it's energy, it's a culture, it's a dance, it's expression, it's energetic, it's flamboyant, it's cars, it's a whole movement.
Back in the 1970s and 1980s, when the Bloods and Crips were growing in LA, the Bay Area was already home to a bunch of local gangs. These groups were tight-knit, based on neighborhoods, and had their own codes and rivalries. When the Bloods and Crips tried to expand north, they ran into resistance. The Bay's gangs didn't want outsiders coming in and taking over. Plus, the Bay Area has always had a different vibe, more about neighborhoods and local identities and less about big citywide colored gangs.
It's always been like, it's not our thing.
It's not our thing.
We have our neighborhoods, we got Hunters Point, we got Sunnydale Projects. They've always been like, this is an LA thing, it's not our thing. And they've always rejected it.
Instead of Bloods and Crips, the Bay Area has always had its own homegrown gangs, each with their own turf, history, and stories.
You got High Street, you got Seminary, Brookfield, you got Acorn, you got Ghost Town, Lord Bottoms, feel me? It's like them like hella the, feel me? You got Bossland, 96. That's like hella the original hoods and shit.
If you go to Oakland, you'll hear about the Acorn Gang, named after the Acorn housing projects in West Oakland. That area has seen a lot over the years: shootouts, police raids, and even community barbecues where everyone tries to keep the peace for a day.
You know what I'm saying? Hey man, what's these buildings behind me, man? These high rises, man. You know what I mean? You know, it's all Acorn though. You feel what I'm saying? Acorn the dominant force around here. Everything around here comes under that Felix Mitchell Act.
Not far from there is Ghost Town, another neighborhood with its own crew. The name Ghost Town comes from the old casket company that used to be there, and the area has a reputation for being tough.
A lot of people used to think this area was haunted, so I think that's a part of the Ghost Town name too, you feel me?
Then there's Seminary, over by Seminary Avenue, where the Seminary Boys have been around for decades. These groups aren't just random, they're made up of people who grew up together, went to the same schools, and have family ties going back generations. Also, they were notorious.
On Seminary, that was a block that we moved to in East Oakland. They call it the Kill Zone.
Richmond, just north of Oakland, has its own scene. North Richmond is famous for being one of the roughest parts of the Bay. The North Richmond gang has been around since the 1960s, and they've had long-standing beefs with Central Richmond and South Richmond.
That's exactly right, Richard. They've sent out 6 patrol cars to an area where they usually would only send out 2, to give you an example. But there are doubts that kind of extra visibility is going to put any kind of an end to the ongoing gang wars here.
There was a time in the 2000s when the violence between North and Central Richmond got so bad that the city had to set up safe zones, where kids could cross from one neighborhood to another without worrying about getting shot. There are stories of families who couldn't even visit relatives a few blocks away because of the danger. San Francisco is a whole different world, but it's got its own sets too. Sunnydale is the biggest public housing project in the city, and the Sunnydale gang has been around since the 1980s. Hunters Point, also known as HP, is another neighborhood with a deep history. The beef between Sunnydale and Hunters Point is legendary. There are people who won't even drive through the other neighborhood because of the risk.
The crack dealing is especially heavy and violent in the Hunters Point area. Today, while gathering these pictures, cameraman Jerry McEwen and I were attacked by a youth who blew out the rear window of our car.
Fillmore, once known as the Harlem of the West for its jazz scene, has its own gang history too. The Fillmore gang, sometimes called the Mo, has had run-ins with other sets, especially during the crack era in the late 80s and early 90s. These Bay Area gangs don't always have the same colors or hand signs as the Bloods and Crips. You might see someone wearing a Raiders hat or a Warriors jacket, but that's more about repping the Bay than a specific gang. What matters most is the block you're from. People will say, "I'm from 65th," or "I'm from the Ville," and everyone knows what that means. It's about local pride, about defending your home and your people. Sometimes these gangs will even put their differences aside if there's a bigger threat. For example, when outside gangs or police crackdowns get too heavy, you might see rival sets working together at least for a little while. But most of the time, it's all about neighborhood beefs, old grudges, fights over respect, or sometimes just a look that went the wrong way. There are stories of people who got caught up in the violence just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or because their cousin was part of a certain crew. The Asian gangs and rivalry, and it doesn't just end with neighborhood gangs. Apart from all the above mentioned, the Bay Area had the Surenos and Tongans.
The only people who bang colors is here is the Mexicans, for me, the Northeast of Surenos.
When you talk about the streets of California, you gotta mention the Surenos. They've been around for decades. The name Surenos means Southerners in Spanish. They came up under the Mexican Mafia, or La M, which runs the show from behind bars. The Surenos started out as neighborhood crews from Southern California, but they weren't just street thugs. They were tied into a whole prison network. Respect, fear, survival. That was the code. Eventually, some of them moved up north. You'd think North California would be all about the Norteños, right? And yeah, mostly. But some Sureno sets found their way into the Bay Area. They weren't welcome at first. The Bay had its own identity, its own street politics, and the Norteños ran deep. So when the Surenos started showing up in places like San Jose, Oakland, and Richmond, it didn't go down smooth.
The outside world is like a playground for us. When we're out on the streets, we have no regard for human life.
San Jose especially started heating up. Surenos began setting up shop, repping the blue, repping the south. They clashed heavy with the Norteños, who rocked red. Bodies dropped, families torn up. It wasn't just street beef, it was cultural. It was prison-born hatred spilling into regular neighborhoods. Now, let's talk Tongans. Tongan gangs weren't like the typical street gangs. They came from tight-knit island families. Loyalty was serious. Respect ran deep. The main Tongan crew people talk about is the TCGs, Tongan Crip Gang. They're based out of Inglewood originally, down south, but some of them moved north. The Bay Area had Tongan communities, especially around places like East Palo Alto and parts of San Mateo County. That's where they started setting up their own presence. Unlike the Surenos, Tongans weren't trying to be part of a bigger network. They just rolled with their own. A lot of their violence wasn't about territory, it was about respect. If you disrespected one, you disrespected all, and they'd come back hard. Sometimes the Tongans and the Surenos found themselves on the same streets, but they weren't exactly allies. Different background, different purpose. Still, they didn't always beef directly. Both had bigger problems. The Surenos were busy trying to survive against Nortenos. That war was bloody. The streets of San Jose turned into a battlefield. You had drive-bys, stabbings, and block-by-block warfare. Police tried cracking down, but it barely put a dent in it. These kids were growing up into this. Some were born into it. The Tongans had their own struggles. Some of the younger ones got caught up trying to prove something. That led to clashes not just with outsiders, but sometimes even among themselves. Fights broke out, shots fired, people died. It was raw and sad. Now here's the twist. The Bay didn't really embrace any of them. The Bay Area's own street politics were different. You had folks from Oakland, Richmond, Vallejo, each city with its own flavor. They weren't necessarily Bloods or Crips, and they definitely weren't feeling outsiders trying to bring that LA mindset up north. So when the Surenos moved in, some locals didn't like it. Fights happened, sometimes full-on shootouts. Some neighborhoods pushed back hard. It wasn't about colors, it was about the Bay's pride. Tongans got some of that heat too. Even though their presence was more quiet and family-based, locals still looked at them like outsiders in certain spots. But Tongans were tough, real tough. They stood their ground, and because they weren't really trying to take over, they didn't face the same hate as the Surenos. Still, confrontations happened. Nothing in the Bay ever stays calm for too long. There were some known incidents too. In the late 90s and early 2000s, you had several gang-related shootings tied to Sureno activity in San Jose. Tongans had their moments too, especially when fights at parties or public gatherings turned deadly. One wrong word, one bad look, it could set off a chain reaction. But through all of it, both groups found ways to stay relevant. The Surenos kept recruiting. They tapped into younger kids, especially ones feeling lost or broke. They promised brotherhood, protection, and for some kids, that was enough. Even in the face of danger, they stayed loyal. The Tongans, on the other hand, stuck close to family. Their strength came from unity. They weren't as flashy, but they were strong where it counted. San Francisco had the Geneva Towers, two 20-story high-rises out in Visitacion Valley, right near Daly City. They were built in the early 60s to be modern housing for working-class families, but that vision fell apart fast. By the late 70s, the place was crumbling. Elevators barely worked, hallways were dark, and maintenance was basically non-existent. It didn't take long before gangs, drugs, and violence took over. The towers were tall, but the energy inside was dead. Over time, the towers turned into a hotspot for street activity. Dealers moved weight, turf wars broke out, and people were just trying to survive. It was one of the most dangerous places in the city. Gangs even used the height to their advantage, scouting the streets from above, watching who pulled up, who didn't belong.
Drug-driven violence that seized this community was just up the block at the notorious Geneva Towers, two low-income high-rise buildings where drug dealers ruled.
This wasn't random chaos either. Sets from Viz Valley, Sunnydale, and other spots across the Bay claimed territory around the towers. And since the late 80s, neighborhoods like Sunnydale, Hunters Point, and Viz Valley have been deep in the mix. Sunnydale is the city's biggest housing project tucked near the edge of town, and it's been known as one of the toughest areas for decades. Hunters Point is just a few miles away and has a similar rep. Generations of families have lived there, and so have long-running beefs. Viz Valley, right next to Sunnydale, has seen plenty of action too.
City's southeast side, the Sunnydale and Hunters Point gangs. Sunnydale, also known as Swampy Desert, controls Sunnydale Avenue to Schwerin Street. It has 110 members, and police say it's one of the most aggressive and...
The Sunnydale versus. Hunters Point rivalry is legendary, like a never-ending family feud. Back in the 90s, there were stories of drive-bys on Sunnydale Ave and shootouts on Harbor Road. Violence even spilled into schools, parks, and sometimes public buses, just because someone was from the wrong side. Most of the time, it started over something small, a party, a fight over a girl, some words exchanged. But once shots were fired, it became a cycle of revenge.
You could not go out into the hallway. Go out in the hallway, no chance. Because you were terrified, you were terrorized, you were involved. There were shootings in the hallways.
Money and drugs added fuel to the fire, especially during the crack era in the late 80s and early 90s, when corners turned into battlegrounds. The police tried cracking down with gang task forces and mass arrests in the 90s, but it didn't fix much. Folks in the community always said the real issue wasn't just gangs, it was poverty, no jobs, and no real way out. In 1998, the city tore down the Geneva Towers. Some saw it as cleaning up. Others saw it as the city trying to erase a part of SF it didn't want to deal with. Either way, it was the beginning of the end of an era.
San Francisco today to witness the end of an era. In a matter of seconds, a public housing project that was both a center of crime and an eyesore came tumbling down.
Their feuds only continued to run deep, and there are real stories that show just how far back they go. Between 2007 and 2010, over 10 murders went down between the two sides, which led to a gang injunction. One of the worst hits was 15-year-old Trey Ducey from the Towers, chased and gunned down outside a school in June 2008. By 2010, Sunnydale lost a young member, Pete Spunks, who was real tight with the crew. Both these guys got dissed in songs later on. Murders like these pushed the cops to crack down with sweeps, ban gang members from the area, and slap on that injunction to cool things off. Crime started to drop, but the beef still simmering. By 2012, it was all-out war again, with over 5 people from both sides killed. Around this time, rappers from both crews started popping up, and that's when the rap beef kicked off. Then 2013 rolled in, and it was straight up brutal for both sides. Some of these beefs are so old, nobody even remembers how they started. You'll hear stories about grandmas who saw the first shots go off back in the day, and now their grandkids are caught up in the same drama. People call it generational beef, where the hate just keeps getting passed down like some twisted family heirloom. Ask anyone from Sunnydale or Hunters Point, and they've got stories. Friends they lost, nights they slept on the floor to dodge stray bullets, the sound of helicopters chopping through the sky after someone got hit. It's real life out there. Trying to count how many people have died from gang violence in San Francisco since 1989 is tough, but everyone agrees it's in the hundreds. Some years were especially bad, like the early 1990s when crack cocaine hit the. Back then, the murder rate shot up. In 1993, San Francisco had 133 homicides, the highest in the city's history. A lot of those deaths happened in neighborhoods like Hunters Point, Sunnydale, and the Western Addition, and many were tied to gang beefs or drug turf wars. If you look at old news stories, you'll see names and faces, young men, sometimes just teenagers, who got caught up in the violence. In 1992, there was a shooting at the Alice Griffith housing projects, also called Double Rock, that left 2 teens dead. In 1994, a drive-by in the Fillmore killed a 16-year-old boy who was just hanging out with friends. These stories happened over and over, year after year. The pain from these losses doesn't just go away. Families have to live with empty seats at the dinner table. Moms and grandmas have to bury their sons. There are murals all over the city, on walls in Hunters Point, in Sunnydale, and in the Mission, painted in memory of people who were killed. Some blocks have so many memorials, it's like a history of loss written in spray paint. Even as the city started to change, when tech companies moved in and rents went up, the violence in certain neighborhoods never really stopped. In 2007, there was a shooting at a block party in Visitacion Valley that left 3 people dead and several more wounded. Some people say San Francisco is safer now, and in some ways, that's true. The overall murder rate has gone down since the 1990s. But if you talk to folks in the neighborhoods where the violence happens, they'll tell you the scars are still there. There are people who won't walk down certain streets after dark. Kids who know to hit the floor when they hear gunshots. Families who light candles every year for loved ones they lost. Groups like United Playaz, Brothers Against Guns, and Omega Boys Club have tried to break the cycle. They hold peace marches, run after-school programs, and help young people find jobs. Some former gang members have become mentors, trying to keep the next generation from making the same mistakes. You don't really see Bloods and Crips in the Bay because the Bay has always had its own gangs, its own rules, and its own street politics. It's more about neighborhoods, pride, and survival. Yeah, there's violence, but there's also family, resilience, and people just trying to make it. To get the real story, you've got to look past the headlines.